On today's Locked On Jayhawks, which Kansas Jayhawk player is the X factor, is the key for Kansas making it to the second weekend, plus a little history lesson on what's gone on in the past between Bill Self and John Calipari.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show, whether you find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe or anywhere that you get your podcast side of things. Please give us a 5-star review there. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're going to discuss why Dajuan Harris is the X factor, is the key for Kansas making it to the second weekend. Can KU get Rylan Griffen going again? That'll be a separate conversation we have in the same episode. And then we're going to go back and look at past history, what it tells us about Bill Self versus John Calipari, because this will be yet another chapter in what has been a pretty long series between two Hall of Fame coaches. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Nissan and the 2025 all-new Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later on in the episode here on Locked On Jayhawks. All right, so Dajuan Harris enters the NCAA tournament for his, I guess, 6th NCAA tournament. Well, no, I guess that's a lie because the COVID year didn't end up playing anyway. So I was going to say technically his 6th, only plays in 5 because he's redshirted in 1 year. The year he redshirted was the COVID year anyway. So his 5th NCAA tournament. And I don't think any are maybe more important to, I don't know, I guess they won the title in 2022, right? Outside of that 2022 season, none of them are more important to his legacy than this. But even that, like, the 2022 title, you know, if you make a strong run in this tournament, it almost wins some stuff back about like your level of play. Is it good enough to win in March? Because you don't want to go out, losing in the first weekend again, which it would be the case every year in his career outside of the national championship. And again, the national championship matters more because that's the ultimate goal here. But when you look at Dajuan Harris, this is an opportunity for him not just to, quiet the haters or whatever, right? I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about, or I guess more interested in the fact that I think there is real backup. As I was going through this and looking at Arkansas, and I was looking at St. John's and trying to figure out, well, which player do I think is going to be most important, their level of play this week for Kansas? Like, obviously Hunter Dickinson, right? If he's your go-to option on offense, that becomes the most important. And that's probably the most intriguing because Arkansas has a bunch of big men. And then if you play St. John's in the second round, like Zuby Ejiofor, that becomes an intriguing storyline. But it feels like with Hunter Dickinson, yes, there are different levels to it. There's the senior day Hunter Dickinson that put up 33 points. There's Hunter Dickinson that puts up 20 and 10. There's Hunter Dickinson that puts up 16 and 8. But like that's a level of like you're still getting good production no matter what. There's a lot of players on this Kansas team that the level of production has been inconsistent. And you could name a lot of different names into that. I wouldn't put Hunter Dickinson in that. He's been very consistent with his production. It's just either like solid production or like elite production. That's kind of the levels that you're going to. With Dajuan, it has been maybe a little bit more consistent than like a Rylan Griffen or an AJ Storr, for instance, or maybe if you're just referring to Zeke Mayo on home and the road, like those have been vastly different. But there have been some more ups and downs for Dajuan Harris that I think has frustrated people for what you would expect for a guy that is supposed to be more of your kind of glue guy, like do what you do well, and that should carry and translate and be consistent no matter where you are. And there's some games where maybe he has 4 turnovers and a couple of them are bad and, it's just not there. And then you have other games where you have 10 assists to 1 turnover, right? So the consistency becomes important here. And I think this all boils down to one main thing as part of this. Guards do win in March. And so if you want to win in March, Dajuan Harris has to play well for you to advance in March. And you look at Arkansas, they've got some very talented guards. So, you're going to be playing a team who, if guards win in March, like they on paper might have the upper hand right now. Well, if Dajuan Harris plays well, maybe that shifts over. Now, the second part of this is we know Dajuan Harris is going to play a ton. He's going to play a ton of minutes. That's always been the case with Bill Self, especially now. NCAA tournament, like he's really going to go with the guys he trusts. And so Dajuan Harris becomes somebody who could be playing 35, 36, 37 minutes in each of these games or the lone game. We'll see how far Kansas makes it, right? And if that is the case, the longer you're on the court, the more, impact you have on things. The other part of this is he is the most experienced player on the team, right? This is a team filled with experience. Hunter Dickinson in his 5th year, KJ Adams in his 4th year, right? Transfers who have been around for a couple of years in college basketball. Dingy Coit, who's been, around, I guess, between JUCO and college for 4 years. You have experienced guys throughout the roster, but nobody's more experienced than Dajuan. This is his 6th year of college, right? It's his 5th year of play. And when you're talking about trying to be a steady point guard, that experience should matter. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of moments this season where it felt like that experience hasn't mattered. It hasn't carried over to calming the team on the road or in clutch moments down the stretch. And there have been some tough clutch moments for not just Kansas this season, but for Dajuan Harris this season or in his career. When you think back to some of the plays that, right, stepping out of bounds in the national title game and, the 10-second call against Arkansas the last time you played them in the NCAA tournament, and some of the stuff that happened this year. But I it would be remiss to not mention the fact that he did have, it is unfortunate that the 10-second call happened because he was having an awesome game against Arkansas. And if you remember, that was the Arkansas game where he got hurt, running into the cameraman, rolled his ankle, and he was playing through that and still played really well. And I think the production went down after that happened, so that certainly hurt a little bit there. But this is a guy who has had some good moments in the NCAA tournament for Kansas. I don't want that to be, forgotten here. As a redshirt freshman, he was more so playing kind of a off the bench, I'll come in for spurts here or there type role. He had 13 points against Eastern Washington, 3 for 4 from 3 with 4 assists and 2 steals off the bench. He was really good as a redshirt freshman in that game against Eastern Washington. 2022 first round. It's Texas Southern, but he did have 12, 3, 2, and 2, solid numbers there. He had 9 points on 3 of 5 from 3, 4 assists, 2 steals against Villanova in the 2022 Final Four. He was really good in that game. But there's some bad ones too, right? 2022 Elite Eight versus Miami, not a ton of stats in some of those games along that journey. The 2021 blowout wasn't great, nor was it for, most KU players who played in that game. The stats in the national championship don't look good. Then again, he, in a lot of ways, helped control that second half with his ability to disrupt, play defense, and help lead to transition opportunities for KU. So I guess point being, by going over all these, I'm kind of saying it's been a inconsistent thing, right? It's been, some games have been good, some games have not. It's not just one thing or another. You need him to be consistently good in this go around. I will say, I don't think people realize how good the stats look for Dajuan Harris over his last 2 NCAA tournaments. So that would give you 4 games over the last 2 seasons. He has 4 straight games in double digits in the NCAA tournament. And between the 2023 and 2024 NCAA tournaments, Dajuan Harris in those 4 games is averaging 11.5 points, 7.5 assists, almost 4 rebounds per game, almost 2 steals per game. The efficiency in the turnovers isn't quite to the level you'd want it there. It's not horrible, but it's not quite up to par with his regular season numbers. But I do find that at least a little bit interesting, that to a certain extent you could say that he actually has, produced at a pretty decent level in the tournament, maybe more so than you might think. But this is your last go around. You were the most experienced guy here. Show it and play well, especially against an Arkansas team, which brings me to the next part of this. They have a bunch of young guards. And so you look at the Arkansas matchup, Boogie Fland is supposed to return, who's over 15 points per game. DJ Wagner, John L. Davis, those are both guys who get 11 points per game. Basically combined, their 3 main guards, when healthy, are giving them 37 points per game. And so you need Harris to step up in a matchup like that where you have 3 athletic guards, because if Dajuan doesn't have a good game, they might already have the guard advantage in this one with their athleticism and the pure talent that they possess. If Dajuan, can neutralize one of those guys, it makes it more winnable for Kansas, right? Or if he can have a better game than one of those guys, or if he can have a good defensive game that disrupts one of those guys, that becomes important. And when you're looking at trying to slow down the Arkansas offense, slowing down those guards is obviously of critical importance. And Dajuan Harris would have as good of a shot as any of the KU guards in doing just that. And then you look back to the exhibition game that happened between Kansas and Arkansas, and he did have a good scoring game. He had over 20 points in that exhibition game. You also look back to the previous time that Dajuan Harris played John Calipari. It was when he was at Kentucky in the Champions Classic, and I think Dajuan had 23 points. That tells me 2 things. 1, it tells me Dajuan has played well against John Calipari. 2, it tells me that John Calipari has the last 2 times he's played Dajuan Harris has set up systems and schemes to say, we're going to let this guy beat us. We're going to try to take away these other things. And if Dajuan Harris goes off, he goes off. And in the exhibition, he went off, didn't hurt Kentucky in that game, but also Hunter Dickinson didn't play, Rylan Griffen didn't play, right? Boogie Fland was playing, right? Just kind of a different situation all the way around. You look at the Champions Classic, it did lose them the game in a way, right? That Dajuan Harris went off. So you go back to that idea and say, okay, if he's going to say, hey, we're going to let Dajuan Harris beat him, well, then Dajuan Harris has to kind of win this game and another one. And then the last part of this is this, going beyond just the first round. If Kansas does make it past Arkansas, you're most likely playing St. John's. And if you play St. John's in the second round, what do the Red Storm do well? They force turnovers. St. John's is top 15 nationally. They were first in Big East games in turnover rate defense. They were also top 20 in steal rate nationally. No one has it in their hands more for Kansas than Dajuan Harris. Maybe Hunter Dickinson, but realistically, Dajuan Harris. We've seen some games with excruciatingly painful Kansas turnovers that have been unforced or just dumb plays. Not saying Dajuan specifically, some Dajuan, some AJ Storr, some even Hunter Dickinson, right? Everybody's kind of contributed there. We've seen others where it's been a masterclass. Like I think the first game against Houston where Kansas should have won the game. He had 12 assists to 1 turnover, right? And so, of course, it only adds more intrigue based on the St. John's style of play, but also the fact that St. John's plays a 6'6" point guard. Like, how on earth would Dajuan Harris match up against a team like that? So I think Dajuan Harris is kind of the key to Kansas moving on to the second round and moving on to the second weekend if you can get to that point in the NCAA tournament. You have known commodities in Hunter Dickinson, and I guess we'll see what happens with Zeke Mayo's shooting. But we saw in the Arizona game, Zeke Mayo was shooting really well. They still lost the game to Arizona. I think Dajuan Harris is kind of the key for KU moving forward. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Bill Self, John Calipari past matchups. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Nissan, and the Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and that all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On College basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart from top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets. These guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week is the Florida Gators. The Gators, led by Walter Clayton, 17 points a game, just dominated the SEC tournament, rolled through it, winning each game by at least 9 points. Not only did Florida grab the 4th 1 seed, but they're the nation's most efficient offense. Todd Golden, maybe future Kansas head coach? Question mark. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. And that's exactly what the Florida Gators have done here. It's clear that our Team of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you in the all-new Nissan Armada or any Nissan outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. This episode is also brought to you by Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. This one's hitting me home right now. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online, right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. Beyond life insurance, Fabric also offers free digital wills and access to investment accounts to help you plan for your children's future. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com. That's MEET, fabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. All right, continuing on. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. Don't forget to check out Locked On College Basketball. Really get you ready for the NCAA tournament there. Or you can check out Locked On Arkansas with it's Locked On Razorbacks, I should say it properly, with John Neighbors to maybe get you ready from their side of things. And just make sure you're making this your first listen every day too, right? Okay, so John Calipari, Bill Self. It's been a fun, I would say, back and forth affair between the two of them. I wanted to go back and look back at past history between these two guys. So you look at the overall record, and Bill Self is 7-6, I believe, against John Calipari. One of those, though, was when Bill Self was at Illinois. If you're just talking about since Bill Self's been at Kansas, it would be 6-6. If you're including the exhibition game this past year, then I guess it'd be 7-7. So wherever you want to go with it. The first meeting between these two, though, was 2002, December 28th. Memphis beat Illinois. That was a home game for Memphis, 77-74. And then that takes us to the second meeting, which is the first one between Self and Calipari when Self's at Kansas. And some people might remember this game. It was the 2008 national championship game. Kansas wins 75-68 in overtime. From there, John Calipari got the better of Bill Self for a while. 2011 Champions Classic, Kentucky wins 75-65 with Anthony Davis and the crew. Then later that spring in 2012 for the national championship, Kentucky wins 67-59. Then in the 2014 Champions Classic, Kentucky wins 72-40, which is the Bill Self drinking water and wishing it was vodka post-game celebration, or not really celebration, mourning, I guess you could say. And at that point in time, John Calipari's won 3 straight. He's 4-1 against Bill Self. And it's like, oh, does he have, the elixir? Not many people are beating Bill Self. Does he know what, does he have it figured out, which is the recipe? Just get a bunch of guys who are going to be like NBA Hall of Famers. Anyway, what changed it was the 2016 matchup between these two. Actually, I think it was the 15-16 season. So it was in January of 2016. It was the Big 12 SEC Challenge. I remember this one for being the rules of basketball game. It was the game that, if you've never seen the 30 for 30, basically David Booth and Kansas buy the rules of basketball. Obviously, that's there now at Allen Fieldhouse and everything like that. At halftime, they brought out the rules of basketball. This is when they officially, I guess, immortalized it in Allen Fieldhouse. They give out T-shirts with the rules of basketball on the back and all that sort of thing. It was a really good game. That was the Kentucky team that had like Tyler Ulis and Jamal Murray, like very good guard team. And oddly, only made it to the second round of the tournament. But Kansas won that one 90-84 in overtime. That was obviously a very good Kansas team. For my money, that is the most underrated Kansas team of the Bill Self era. That team was so good, that 2015-16 team. I mean, they won 17 straight games, which started with that win over Kentucky. And I think that was Wayne Selden's career high. I don't know if he ever got more than that, 33 points against Kentucky. That was a fun one. Then 2017, that was another fun one. Kansas goes on the road to Kentucky in the Big 12 SEC Challenge. And that was, Josh Jackson, Frank Mason, Landon Lucas had a big game against Bam Adebayo. I mean, looking back, that one looks even more sweet because it's De'Aaron Fox, who's been like a very good NBA player, like all-star. Malik Monk, who's been a very good NBA player, not quite all-star, but like good player. And Bam Adebayo, who's like Team USA. And Kansas beat that team in their home building. Frank Mason, man. 79-73, so that was a fun one there for KU. Then the same calendar year, but different season, 2017 Champions Classic for the 17-18 season. Kansas wins 65-61. That was a game that you think of Devontae Graham and Malik Newman, they won a game ugly. And I remember Bill Self was so happy after the game because he knew what that team was going to be, that they were going to be more of a finesse three-point shooting team. The fact that they showed they could win like that, he absolutely loved it, even though it was a very ugly game. So at that point in time, you go from Bill Self winning the big national title game, John Calipari is now 4-1 against Bill Self, to then all of a sudden Kansas, can they be stopped against John Calipari? They've won 3 straight games. It's tied 4-4. Well, then 2018 happens, and that 2018-19 Kansas team, actually, I think it would have been in 2019 in January. Again, Big 12 SEC Challenge. And Reed Travis and not a great Kansas team. That was the game that David McCormick, with all the confidence in the world, pulled up in transition and shot like a mid-range jumper. I think it almost like banked in. That was my biggest memory from the game, which probably doesn't speak well to the game. Kansas loses 71-63 there. The next time they meet is the 2020 Champions Classic, in which Kansas wins 65-62, kind of another ugly one. That one was played without like fans. That was kind of the Jalen Wilson coming out party as a redshirt freshman for KU. Next time they meet is 2022 in Allen Fieldhouse. And that was the kind of, oh crap moment of, are we sure this team can win a national title? They lose by 18 at home to Kentucky. And, looking back on what happened from there, Kansas still had a couple losses after that. But I think it was either the next game or the game after that they like crushed, I want to say Baylor, just beat the doors off them, where it was a reminder of, okay, maybe that was just one game. And looking back too, it's easier because, Ochai Agbaji, I think the next game was out with COVID. He was clearly playing sick in that game. Wasn't himself. He was a National Player of the Year candidate that year, so that's kind of important. Remy Martin played through the game with an injury that he didn't play again after that for like a month. Like, he probably shouldn't have been playing. He was probably a detriment because he wasn't 100%. So you're playing with two guys who, by the time the end of the season came, were two of your most 5 or 6 important players on the team. One of them probably the most important player on the team in Ochai, that were, beat up, I guess, in different ways coming into that game. And I remember there was that forward, oh gosh, what was his name? It started with a K, for Kentucky. For some reason I want to say Keon Ellis, but I don't think that's right. Maybe it is. That just like hit every shot. He was like making every shot from the mid-range, had like 20-something points. Looking back on it, I'm just kind of like, oh, okay, that it happens, sometimes, right? But at the moment, like, that was such an aberration. Anyway, 2023, Kansas goes into Kentucky and wins that one 77-68. That was a fun one, night game in which they were able to really slow down like Oscar Tshiebwe in the middle of the defense. And then the 2023 Champions Classic, Kansas wins 89-84, in which I mentioned Dajuan Harris had 23 points. He had 7 assists. Hunter Dickinson was unbelievable. 27 points, 21 rebounds for KU. And then KJ Adams even had 16 points. But maybe the star of the show, I don't know. I guess Hunter had 27 and 21. That's the real star of the show. Kevin McCullough, though, had a triple-double in that game. That is when things were really rolling. So in the end, Bill Self 7 wins, John Calipari 6 between the two. In the postseason, it is 1-1. Both of them have been national titles. This is not a national title game, but, for both these coaches, they're going to approach it like it is because they're both very big competitors. And what I find interesting, too, is the tournament success, very similar for these two guys. They've done it in different ways. Calipari had that stretch where he had like 4 straight Final Fours, and that amassed a majority of his, good tournament runs at Kentucky. He had some deeper runs at Memphis, too. For Bill Self, it's been more spread out. It's been, okay, maybe a second round here and then an Elite Eight, second round, like Final Four, something like that, right? But in the end, Bill Self in the NCAA tournament, 53-23. John Calipari is 57-22. So Calipari's 72% win percentage in the tournament, Bill Self 70%. But if you look at Bill Self started 13-8 in the NCAA tournament, going back to his time because that record I'm talking about here, it's for Calipari, it includes his stops at UMass, Memphis, Kentucky, now obviously at Arkansas. For Bill Self, it includes his time at Oral Roberts, though he didn't make a tournament, Tulsa, Illinois, and now Kansas. And if you look at Bill Self, he started 13-8 in the tournament after those back-to-back first-round losses at Kansas. Since that point, he is 40-15 in the tournament. So that's a 72.7 win percentage. John Calipari, 72.2. It's funny how close those are. Also, first-round records, which is of note because they're playing in the first round. Bill Self, 23-2. John Calipari, 20-3. So slight edge for Self, but again, it's close. And I will say the trend is going Self's way. Bill Self has won 17 straight first-round matchups. John Calipari has lost 2 of his last 3. So I don't really have a point to come with there. I just thought about sharing that information. I found it kind of interesting and chronicling back because who knows? For all we know, this could be the last matchup between the two, right? Because now the Calipari's at Arkansas. You're not on the schedule every year in the Champions Classic. And, right, I mean, Bill Self or Calipari, either one could retire in 2 years, in 5 years. You just don't know. And for all we know, this could be the last matchup. We'll have to wait and see. All right, can Kansas get Rylan Griffen going? What's been going on there? We discussed that on the other side. This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. Fast and easy hiring is part of the Upwork process. Posting a job is free and it's simple. And within a day, with multiple qualified candidates to choose from, right to your posting. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork, UPWORK.com. Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Thank you for joining us here on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll have a Kansas-Arkansas preview coming up for you to get you ready for that matchup. We'll have a postcast for you after the game late into your Thursday night here on Locked On Jayhawks as well. So make sure you subscribe to the show so you won't miss any of the action. Okay, can Kansas get Rylan Griffen going again? That is the big question, but real quick, we're going to take a break with the guys from CBB, Locked On College Basketball.
The NCAA Tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA Tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
And they'll be talking about Kansas and many of the other teams going on in the tournament. All right, so can Kansas get Rylan Griffen going again? Well, in the Big 12 tournament, They did not. Rylan Griffen had a combined 2 points between the two games. He was 1 for 10 shooting. I did find it interesting, though, that Bill Self continued to start him. Now, will that be different now that it's NCAA tournament time? Entirely possible. But that almost tells me that, like, he's basically saying, hey, I'm going to continue to try to show him a little bit of trust because we have no other option. If Rylan Griffen can't get going, there is not an alternative for us, right? Like, AJ Storr he had the big game in the Big 12 tournament, followed up without a big game, right? And so Bill Self sees the big picture of saying, if we are going to make a deep run in this NCAA tournament, Rylan Griffen has to get going. And so me keeping him in the starting lineup and trying to show a little bit of that faith, maybe that is what he needs to get going. Well, it didn't work in the Big 12 tournament. We'll see if it works in the NCAA tournament. I got to think, though, for him, Rylan, that is, he's got to have good vibes in this tournament, right? After what happened last year. And now that you can say the new season thing all you want, but it's hard to really live that for some guys, I'm sure. You hear stories about like baseball players who talk about like once you get in a slump and then there's the stats up on the video board and you see it every time and you're at 198 and you start to press like, oh, I got to get above the Mendoza line. You wonder if that's the thing with Rylan Griffen. Maybe the fact that it's the NCAA tournament actually allows him to have a reset there, because since Monday, February 3rd, which was the game against Iowa State that Kansas, I think that's the one they won. He's gone just 19 of 77 shooting, including 13 of 51 from three. That equates to 25% from the field and 25% from three. And that is over a really long stretch of games. And that's the weirdest part about this was like, it's the same thing with Nick Timberlake, where for a while, the big thing with Rylan Griffen, maybe not playing as big a role as you might have thought, it was maybe more about the defense or knowing where to be and yada, yada, the trust things with Bill Self. He was still shooting, maybe not to the level he was at Alabama, but he was still shooting well. And now you're getting just a level where it's like, what's going on here? Why is this happening? But Kansas cannot make it through this weekend or, make a run in the NCAA tournament without some sort of contribution from the transfer wings. I'm not saying they got to average 15 a game, but you need a couple threes from Rylan Griffen per game in theory, right? And this is what he did in the tournament last year, 12.4 points per game, 50% from the field, 48% from three. He was awesome for Alabama in making that run to the Final Four. He had 8 or more points in every game, so you got consistency. He made a 3 in every game of the tournament run, including 2 or more made threes in 4 of their 5 NCAA tournament games. So you got consistency in a real level you could count on. If Kansas can get that in this tournament run, I think you would feel great about it. If you told me 8 points per game on 1 to 2 to 3 made 3-pointers per game that Kansas is in the tournament, I think you would feel okay with that at this point in time. And you look at that first matchup with Arkansas. I mean, if Carter Knox is their 3, Carter Knox is a very talented player. He's also a freshman. Maybe he can take advantage with a little bit of experience. And both Arkansas and St. John's allow a fair amount of attempts from 3 too. So it's really him and Zeke Mayo as KU's main shooters. Diggy Coit off the bench too. That Kansas really needs him to get going in the same way that they need Dajuan Harris to be an X factor if they want to move on past Arkansas and into the second weekend beyond that. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. See you next time for another edition talking some KU basketball on LOJ.